So at this point, we're going to open it up for a panel discussion. So questions can be asked of any of the last three speakers. Feel free to raise your hand, ask a question verbally, or go ahead and put it into chat. There are a couple of questions already in chat. So I wanted to go back to one that was asked when Jim was talking, and I'll paraphrase a little bit here. It was with regards to leaving footprints and not gear behind, and asking Jim if there's any ways of minimizing this impact on the moon. And before we have Jim speak, I'd actually like to hear Sarah if that's a consideration for McMurdo base, and if so, would any of those kind of policies that have been put in place apply to the moon?
Yes, under the treaty, everybody has to be extremely careful about what we leave down there. I'd say that's not historically been the case. I mean, but certainly since the treaty has been enforced, that really, we have a lot of activities under that govern environmental protection. A lot of those dry valley areas are even more much more restricted than we are at McMurdo in what we can leave behind and what we do when we're there. And so, yeah, we have a lot of protocols for field workers about, everything that goes in has to come out. That's more or less the case at McMurdo as well. So yeah, and that's all agreed at an international level. So every country that works down there undertakes to obey those same protocols.
Yeah, I just add to that. Sarah said it exactly right, and I think one of the things to think about is in the context of the Artemis Base Camp. So when we go to McMurdo, so I had 5 field seasons down there, okay, and so McMurdo, great slides, great memories there. But the key is we go into McMurdo. It's like a mining town in a way. Okay, you get all your supplies, you have all your facilities there. But we get our stuff and get helicoptered out to the dry valleys as soon as possible, because that's where our field area is. That's where we do all our field activity. And Sarah's absolutely right that the protocols out there, you take out everything you bring in. I mean, everything. Okay, that includes all wastes and everything like that. And we're extremely careful. And even leaving footprints, you try not to leave those. And when you do traverse around by foot, which is of course the only way we have to go out there, is that you are very careful to use the same trail, to minimize your off trail kind of thing. Okay, your damage, etc. So there's a huge conscientiousness about that. That's just part of the ethos, if you will. And I think that's going to be really important to think about, not just for preserving the scientific areas, but essentially not just leaving trash and environment, willy-nilly around the Artemis Base Camp or anywhere else on the moon. Thanks.
Thanks. So we have another question. This one's from Bill O'Hara. If the subject of this workshop is Artemis Base Camp science, what assumptions are we using for the content of the base and when it will be established? So in terms of this meeting, we're actually asking you to tell us what activities need to happen at an Artemis Base Camp, and that can be used to define what the content needs to be. But I would like to hear from the panelists about what input they would have on what the content of the base could be, maybe starting with John.
Well, since we're going to the South Pole, a big part of it is going to be understanding those frozen volatiles. Yeah, we have evidence they're there from orbit. We have no idea what quantity they're in. Are they really in usable quantities for people to live off of? And are they in quantities that are accessible by equipment, right? If they're if the huge quantity, like Kevin Cannon has a really neat model on where some of these ice deposits might be in these craters. But if they're so deep, we can't economically get to them, then, what real use is it? So a big part of the ISRU is making oxygen out of the regolith, right? And then we can go anywhere on the moon, right? Make that oxygen. Now, the beauty of the South Pole, of course, is that illumination where we can start off with sunlight, but eventually we need the nuke, right? And if we have a nuke, then again, we can put bases anywhere on the moon with the nuclear power and get through that lunar night. But for me, it's all about the applied science of finding those natural resources on the moon, almost like an economic geologist, and then assessing whether they really are reserves or not.
Yeah, I could add to that too, that I think, one of the things we have been considering with this Apollo 15 500-day mission, design reference mission, is just what you're talking about. What does the initial base look like? What do the peripheral bases look like? And one of the things we're really concerned with, of course, is the fact that you want to have with you a robotic rover, possibly controlled from the Earth, or maybe even controlled, from the base. You need to have room, okay, for living quarters. You need to have room for operational quarters. You don't want them to be exactly in the same area necessarily. And you're going to be spending 2 weeks of the lunar day in the dark. So it's sort of like combining Antarctica, in summer and winter. I mean, it's going to be tough. So you need to have things to take care of your assessments there. You need to have a laboratory that doesn't get dust all over the place so you can examine the samples. There's lots of really important things that we're trying to identify to feed forward to these kinds of questions, and also to Mars in particular. So I just encourage you we gave 6 posters, the students did, at LPSC on different aspects of this Apollo 15 500-day mission. So you can just do Hadley Max, and you can recover those. I hope they're informative in this concern as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and Jim mentioned different seasons. Sarah, I'm curious, could you describe a little bit about how McMurdo grows and shrinks with the different seasons down there?
Yeah, we don't really host any science out of McMurdo, very little, essentially none in the winter. So in the summer, we currently have an occupancy of about 970 beds. We have another dorm that we're building, which will add another couple of hundred to that. In winter, you've just got basically a skeleton operation of 150 that just keeps the place ticking over. Our South Pole station is 150 in summer and about 30-ish. Those actually have year-round operations because they have the big telescopes down there. They actually do better sometimes when it's dark, and that's partly why they're there. So we do have those 2 different modes of operation. And of course, we have no transport in and out for 8 months for South Pole, and typically maybe 5 months or so for McMurdo. So it's depending on when you start. So yeah, there's that as well. There's that difference between the 2 seasons.
Sarah, quick question. What's the completion date for the new Hotel California there? Is that next year or so?
I believe it's more than a year. Yeah, it's not quite. I was there in January, and it was coming along, but I wouldn't say it was going to be occupied.
Okay.
Right away.
We're waiting.
Yeah, we all are. Yeah.
Sure,
We'd love to send more people down there.
Hey, Ben, I would like to add something a little bit to that. Jim mentioned the importance of teleoperation of robots on the moon. Unfortunately, these first Artemis missions are going to be, few and far between. And yet we're going to have an LTV announced later today. And you're going to find out that these LTVs and possibly the pressurized rover, that'll be up to JAXA because it's theirs. But this LTV is going to primarily be used by NASA, particularly when the astronauts are going to be there. But there's an awful lot of days of the year where there's nobody on the moon at the Artemis Base Camp. And so these mobility assets, the LTV and possibly the pressurized rover, using those to scout out new places for the astronauts when they do return, and maybe looking for resources is going to be really important, this continual robotic exploration. And hopefully the CLIPS missions will be able to evolve to where they can land larger payloads. Viper's going to be 500 kilograms, but I'm a big fan of CLIPS landing all over the South Pole with robotic assets that can hopefully survive the night and drive around and collect information that's going to be critical to our long-term stay there with humans.
If I could just add to that, in Apollo, we had Apollo 16, Apollo 18, 19, and 20, or 20, 21, and 22, I forget, which of course never happened, but we had a dual mode rover where at the end of the nominal mission, the thing would be outfitted with a robotic capability. It had that already, but it would be sent to the next landing site. So it interpolated between the landing sites. And that's another thing to think about in that context with the robotic rovers, or the human and robotic rovers.
Okay. Last chance. If you want to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand or put it in chat. We do have a question from a little while back from RVB. Who wants to know, where would you like to put an Artemis base camp? What's your favorite location to put it?
All right, I'll jump in there first because and maybe this is going to surprise people. I wouldn't go to the South Pole. I'd go to Aristarchus Plateau. I mean, of course, we're going to need that nuclear reactor, but we can use that big pyroclastic deposit as our resource. And if you remember the Jaywin report, so many big stars in that northwest quadrant of the near side of the moon, not just Aristarchus Plateau, but Marius Hills, Reiner Gamma, all those young lava flows. So that's where I want to go.
I guess I'd go to somewhere in the South Polacan Basin, and if we didn't have a communication satellite, we could maybe rent the Chinese one because it's a beautiful satellite in orbit right now. A new one just went into orbit. I think I would go to the far side. In Apollo, we actually considered going to the far side. Jack Schmidt was a champion of Tsiolkovsky, but of course, with no communication satellite and the extra costs, it never happened.
Okay, great. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. The idea of hearing McMurdo and South Pole bases, are hundreds of people. It's really excited. What could you do with 100 astronauts on the moon? Definitely want to grow towards that in the future. But thank you again for your perspectives. We are going to take a break now.